Today, I'm going to reveal a lazy method to memorize vocabulary effortlessly in any language. You won't believe how simple it is. If you're new here, minasan, konnichiwa! My name's Matthew. I used to work for Fluid Forever, where I was mentored by the American polyglot and best-selling author Gabriel Weiner. Ever since I branched out on my own, I've realized that I just still love learning languages. So I've developed my own tools and techniques, and I'd love to share them to help you too. So let's talk about how you can memorize vocabulary in any language without too much effort. That is the lazy way. And that method is through input. Yes, reading and listening. Let's explore how. So when I talk about input, what do I mean? I'm talking about reading and listening in the target language as much as you can. Read and listen to materials that interest you and are so compelling that you don't want to stop engaging with that content. Often you want to expose yourself to input that is just above your level. You can enjoy it comfortably and just challenge yourself by the few amounts of words that you don't know yet. There are two core benefits of doing this. Firstly, effortless learning. This is the lazy and effortless way to memorize vocabulary because you don't need to intentionally learn and memorize new words. Just expose yourself to content that you enjoy and understand. And that there is the second benefit of this method, the enjoyable content. Preferably choose material that is at your level with just a few unknown words. And when you do that, you can enjoy the language and learn words naturally. Well, that sounds all well and good, but you're probably wondering, can this really work? Well, let's look at the research. There are studies that show that you can learn and memorize vocabulary incidentally with just by reading and listening. And when I say that you memorize the words incidentally, I mean that you just happen to memorize the words almost by accident or by chance. You weren't intentionally trying to actively learn the words, it just happens. One study had a group of language learners read a novel in their target language. By the end of the study, researchers found that the students had acquired the spelling of the new words as well as the definitions of these new words without having to try so hard. They did so simply by reading this authentic novel. When the language learner was able to read a certain word 10 or more times, they were able to understand the meaning of new words as well as even the spelling of those words. And they were even able to retain that new vocabulary knowledge. A similar study now looked at the effects of listening input on vocabulary acquisition. This study also showed that learners can simply just listen to input in their target language, and through that they're able to learn and memorize the meanings of new words. And when it comes to listening input, learners needed around 15 exposures of a new word in order to retain that vocabulary. Both of these studies are really interesting and demonstrate that simply by reading and listening to a lot of authentic materials in the target language, you can learn and memorize vocabulary, but you might need around 10 to 15 exposures of a new word in order to really acquire it and retain it well. So that sounds great. So where can you get different sources of input in your target language? If you want to learn and memorize vocab from reading, then why not consider reading books, articles, blogs, comics, newspapers, and magazines. If you want to focus on listening input, then consider listening to audiobooks, to music, movies, and podcasts. And for a double benefit, why not consider combining both reading and listening by considering watching movies with the subtitles in the target language turned on. You could also listen to music while reading the lyrics, or you could read books along with listening to the audiobook version at the same time. And you can actually grab hold of some free books and audiobooks in different languages such as English, French, German, Italian, and Spanish and more on my website. so you can get started with memorizing new vocabulary through reading and listening. Check out the link in the description to get these free books and audiobooks. I truly believe that getting lots of input in your target language is an effortless way to acquire new vocabulary. But one of the challenges that you will face is finding the right materials for you in a target language that are suited to your level, especially if you're a beginner or intermediate in that language. I've got 4 potential solutions for you if you're struggling with this. Firstly, consider easier input. You may have really wanted to read or listen to some materials that you like in your native language, but in your new language, but it's just too hard. Why not consider starting with something a little easier, just to ease you in? Consider easier materials such as children's books. Picture books are a great starting point, especially for absolute beginners, and as you move up in your language level, you can then move on to children's books without pictures, and then teenager and young adult books and novels. You could also use simplified texts or audios that are tailored more for language learners. And you could check out graded readers, which are books and resources that are graded according to different ranges of vocabulary sizes. So you could start off with a more basic graded reader, and as your vocabulary grows, you can increase the level of the graded reader that you're reading. Another easy material for listening are slow audios, and there are often slow audio podcasts in different languages where the audio is slowed down deliberately, and they often use easier language in those audios. They can talk about the news or the culture, and they can be a great way to get started. Or you could just listen to any other type of authentic audio material, but just slow it down to a comfortable speed so that you can pick up the words and the language without stressing you out too much. If it's still too hard to memorize new words from reading and listening, then you could also consider narrow input. Narrow input involves focusing your listening and reading in a specific field or genre so that you can master the vocabulary first in that area. Instead of trying to get input from all different kinds of sources, from all different kinds of fields and categories, why not just make sure you're comfortable with the words being used in just one field? For example, you could focus your input just on makeup tutorials on YouTube or cooking shows. You could concentrate just on sports commentary or tech reviews. Whatever interests you and is relevant to your life is a great place to start. If even that is too difficult, then why not try this third option, language role models. Just focus your input of listening and reading from just one language role model. This means find a native speaker in your target language who you admire. They could be a celebrity, a YouTuber, a podcaster, an author, anyone you want to speak like and you find interesting. You can choose to consume their content exclusively. This can be a lot easier than reading and listening from a whole range of different native speakers. When you just have one language role model, you can focus your attention on the words that they use, and you'll find that often people reuse the same kinds of words and phrases and sentence structures as an expression of their individuality and personality. Then, once you've learned and memorized some of the key words that a certain role model often uses, you can then move on to another language role model and consume their content exclusively too. If all of those solutions still don't work for you because you're not able to understand the language and it's too overwhelming, then you might have to consider the fourth solution, which is intentional learning of vocabulary. And when I talk about intentional learning of words, I mean trying to memorize words when you do it on purpose, you're doing it more actively, and you're deliberately doing activities to make it happen that you memorize new vocab. Give yourself a foundation in the language by learning the most common words in that target language so that you're not overwhelmed by harder, authentic materials. Once you've learned and memorized some of the most frequently used words in the target language, you can then try again to just learn words incidentally from reading and listening to input. Now, remember when I said that input was the effortless and lazy way to memorize new vocabulary? Well, you still have to do a little bit of work. You will still need to read and listen to authentic native materials in your target language. And you'll have to do that on an ongoing basis while trying to gradually increase the level and difficulty of the materials that you expose to. Remember the research which said that you needed multiple exposures of a new word in input in order to retain and acquire it, like around 10 to 15 exposures? Well, you're not going to get that exposure if you just sit there and do nothing. This does mean you need a lot of input and ongoing input in order to achieve this. So it is important to build daily habits of reading and listening in your target language so you can take advantage of this incidental learning and memorizing of new words. You will need to organize your time well, and you'll have to integrate listening and reading into your daily routine, even if you're busy or have a full-time job. And I've actually got another video which you can check out if you are struggling with fitting language learning into your busy life. So go watch that video if this is a problem for you. Now let's talk about the balance between incidental memorization of words through input, as well as the intentional learning and memorizing of words through active recall. There are some language learners and linguists that argue that all you need to be fluent in a foreign language and to memorize all the words is to get a massive amount of input. From my personal experience trying to do just that, I found it a bit difficult at times to just focus on incidental learning of new words. And the reason is because at the beginner stages of a language, you just don't know enough words to commit yourself to only input. I recognize and admit that I'm not a native speaker growing up in those target languages. And so I don't have all the time in the world really to get all of that input of reading and listening throughout my daily life. I've often found that doing some intentional learning and memorizing of vocabulary can be helpful as a supplement to getting lots of input. I also find that as I get to the upper, intermediate, and advanced stages of a foreign language, when I read and listen, I often come across words that I will not see often enough. And so I will not be able to reach those 10 to 15 exposures of that word in order to truly memorize it. And so flashcards and other active recall methods can be helpful for me at the very beginner and also the advanced stages of learning a language. And there actually is research that shows when it comes to those very rare or technical words that are beyond the most frequent words, you may not encounter them enough times through just reading alone. For me personally, the combined method of reading and listening while doing some supplementary active memorizing of words has been the powerful combination that has helped me to grow my language learning and vocabulary acquisition. And some recent studies from researchers at the University of California and Columbia University in the United States have shown that this combination of both incidental learning and intentional learning and memorizing of words can actually lead to greater gains in vocabulary knowledge. That's what's worked best for me too, and what I generally recommend, a more balanced approach. If that sounds interesting to you, then be sure to check out this next video where I talk about how I combine both input and deliberate methods to learn new vocabulary. Check it out now.